All right, guys. So yesterday on Breaking Points, we had Michigan Senator Elissa Slotkin on the show where we covered Epstein and Zoran, but I think a bulk of it was made up talking about Israel and Gaza. Now, obviously, full disclosure, I work for Breaking Points, so there's some degree of bias, at least, in favor of the hosts from my perspective, but I think what you see in this interview is a very rare opportunity to have a U.S. Senator, one of the most powerful people in the country, be genuinely and relentlessly pressed on this issue in a way where they're not allowed to tap dance. They're not allowed to give waffling answers. And I think that Krystal and Saagar both did a great job of cutting through the talking points that I think you hear disproportionately from liberals and Democrats who may have some degree of an issue with the human suffering in Gaza. But when it comes to principle, when it comes to policy, don't actually change anything in regards to our relationship with Israel. So let's go ahead and jump into this and break it down as we go.
Let's talk about those, calling them balls and strikes, if you will. So first of all, do you accept that Israel has a policy of enforced famine and starvation in the Gaza Strip?
I think I literally put my name on a letter yesterday or last night that says like a policy of starvation, people are starting to starve. And in general, I mean, I served in places like Ramadi and Fallujah. I watched in 2004 and 2005, Al-Qaeda terrorists drag American citizens.
Former CIA agent, by the way, Elissa Slotkin, just to clarify.
Behind a vehicle until they died, right? Like horrible, and then string them up like a lynching.
Okay.
We still had a responsibility to get aid into Fallujah, despite the fact that we were fighting Al-Qaeda cells in Fallujah, and I have been clear about that.
So this is a crime against humanity. Forced starvation is a crime against humanity.
The occupying power has a responsibility to get aid into the war zone, period.
So
by the law of war.
So in addition, do you accept that the Israeli plan, as reported by Haaretz, as discussed openly by ministers like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, as backed by the President of the United States, is forced ethnic cleansing?
I think we have, as recently as yesterday, the Prime Minister of Israel talking about forced migration into certain areas and then potentially out of the country. That is not legal. That is not on any international standard since World War II. And I've been clear about that. So I would ask for a little bit of an open mind.
Well, what I would ask.
Okay, so we'll continue, but to her credit, at least the minimal amount so far, she has recognized that yes, Israel does have a policy of forced starvation, and yes, their plan moving forward, backed by Trump, is essentially ethnic cleansing. She didn't use those words, but she says forced migration out of Gaza. So she has established that she agrees that that is what's happening on the ground. Now Krystal is going to ask the important question here, which is, okay, you've recognized that. Now what are you actually going to do about it?
Listen, I'm a YouTuber, I have my words, that's all I have, but you're a United States Senator. Like you're not the president, but you have power. So what are you going to do? Because so far what we've seen, I mean, you voted for some of the aid that's been used to massacre children and innocents. You have backed Israel, as far as I can tell, from your voting record at almost every turn. You voted for a definition of anti-Semitism that would, codify anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. You voted as a member of the House to sanction the ICC for indicting Benjamin Netanyahu, who you just admitted is a war criminal, by your own words.
And by the way, as a reminder, that ICC warrant from the International Criminal Court against Benjamin Netanyahu, the first thing that they cited in that warrant was a policy of forced starvation. And that happened all the way last year. I mean, months and months and months ago, we're talking about. And in response to an accusation from the International Criminal Court that Benjamin Netanyahu was intentionally starving the people of Gaza, Elissa Slotkin voted to sanction the ICC, to punish them for trying to prevent the starvation that we are seeing right now.
Are you going to join Senator Angus King, Senator Bernie Sanders in saying no more aid to this country that is committing war crimes against innocent civilians?
I think the first thing, if you're asking about what to do with power, and I would offer that right now Democrats own nothing in Washington. So
don't play powerless with me. You're a United States Senator. There are things you can do.
In terms of who runs our foreign policy, I just think it's interesting, right, that there was a ton of protests when Democrats were in charge.
There was a protest in Manhattan yesterday.
Okay. I think it's fair to say, just to be honest, that back and forth, like the number of protests that go on now versus before.
Well, they were part of your political coalition.
Well, that's
right?
I mean, Senator Slotkin,
that's fair.
Obviously, I'm here. I was very upset over the Biden administration policy. And as you can tell, I'm very upset over the Trump administration policy. So let's deal not in straw men, but meet in the here and now.
Terms of so the tools that I have.
I mean, total straw man there. And credit to Krystal for calling it out. why are we bringing up the protest numbers as if that's relevant to whether or not Israel is committing a genocide or whether or not they're pushing forward with an ethnic cleansing plan or what your response to that is going to be, other than, I guess, to try to smear the protesters as being disingenuous, to say that they weren't really serious about it? I mean, total and complete straw man and a deflection. And again, credit to Krystal, snipes right through it.
The tools that we have in general. To me, the most important thing is a pressurized campaign to get aid into people who are starving. That to me is the number one, because that's the one is urgent and today. And that.
But will you cut off aid to Israel so long as they're committing crimes against humanity?
There is a difference between a weapon to protect a country from incoming missiles versus other type. Offensive and defensive weapons are different.
So would you support offensive weapons ban? Like, would you stop any offensive aid to Israel?
That certainly, to me, would be a place to look, but I'm not going to cut off a blanket next sale on a defensive weapon that comes through. No.
And by the way, unfortunately, this is the exact same line of logic that even people like AOC use to justify voting in favor of these so-called defensive weapons to Israel. The reality, of course, is that there's no such thing as a distinction between offensive and defensive weapons. Israel could not act in the belligerent way that they are acting right now if it wasn't for the U.S. supplying and backing them with these so-called defensive weapons. So it's a total nonsense sort of deflection point. And Saagar follows up and he says, well, would you agree to cut off offensive weapons then? And even to that, she's not willing to commit, which again, then the question is, okay, you say you want to get aid into Gaza. Well, okay, Israel is blocking the aid. How are you going to use the leverage that the U.S. government has at our disposal in order to pressure them to allow more aid in? One of the only pressure points that we have is cutting off that aid. If you refuse to do that, then, how serious are we supposed to take you in regards to rushing aid into Gaza?
I also reject that because, for example, if Senator Slotkin, if you were asked to support defensive weapons for Iran, defensive weapons for Russia, you wouldn't back that.
No, but Iran, but
they're defensive. They're just protecting civilians, right? So how is it different?
But because Israel's being shot at.
So is
Russia. So is Iran.
Yeah.
So is Russia.
Ukraine's shooting at Russia right now.
I'm sorry. This is the difference between allies, partners, and adversaries.
Why is it an ally then? What are they doing right now that which makes it an ally?
I think allied relationships, just like Lithuania right now, like an allied relationship or a partner relationship is a long-standing relationship of information sharing and diplomacy. And that is, to me, it's not a every day we decide Lithuania is our ally or not. We're allied or not. And sometimes we have big breaks with allies, right? Sometimes we have difficult moments with allies. Sometimes it goes the wrong way with allies. But an allied relationship is a long-term relationship.
It's hard for me to understand why we should ally. I'm sure you believe in or claim to believe in liberal human rights. Why would we ally with a nation that is committing a genocide and live streaming it?
Can I ask literally, this, I think about this from the mirror image way, because I do not support the things that Donald Trump is doing, right? But I'm an American. So do I want other countries to look at America and be like, we can't stand Donald Trump, so we're going to end any longstanding relationship we have with the American people. We're going to cut off any support we give them on information sharing or intelligence sharing. We are not just our elected leaders. And I think that's the thing that's been lost in the conversation.
So B'Tselem and another Israeli.
Okay, so she moves on to a different portion of the questioning here, but two back-to-back questions there, both from Saagar asking, is Israel an ally? Why are they an ally of the U.S.? And then that initial comparison of if you support so-called defensive weapons to Israel, even though you disagree with their offensive actions in Gaza, you support the defensive weapons to them because you want to protect civilians, right? Civilians should be protected in Israel no matter what they may be doing. The comparison there to say, well, okay, would you support then defensive weapons to Russia to protect Russian civilians, or defensive weapons to Iran to protect Iranian civilians, or do those civilians not count? That's a great because there's no response to that, right? If a government is committing mass atrocities with the weapons that we are giving them, and you're trying to parse, well, these are actually just defensive weapons intended to protect Israeli civilians, you would have to apply that to many other countries around the world as well, including adversaries, if your goal is purely protecting civilians. She didn't really have a rebuttal to that outside of, well, Israel is our ally and they are our adversaries. Even in the comparison with Iran, you could argue that they were, you can't even argue, it's just a fact, they were the ones who were being aggressed upon initially by Israel. So you could even make a stronger case to protect Iranian civilians in that instance. But she says basically, Israel is our ally, and Iran and Russia, they're our adversaries. And so Saagar asks a follow-up question, why are they our ally? And it might seem like an outlandish question, to Americans, to a lot of Americans, because, well, they've always been one of our top allies. They're essentially treated like a 51st state. So like, what do you mean? Why are they? Well, if you just look at the basic facts in terms of, are they benefiting the United States? Are they benefiting the American people? There's a pretty definitive answer to that. And it's no, they're really not. I mean, right now, over the last 2 years, given our support for their genocide in Gaza, we have completely blown away. We have evaporated any sort of credibility that we have on the international stage in regards to human rights, in regards to international law, in regards to democracy or freedom or whatever else. We've obliterated any sort of semblance of that reputation that remained for the U.S. on behalf of Israel. And then even in the region, Israel is incredibly hostile. They are destabilizing the region. And every time that they engage in offensive acts of aggression, like the one against Iran that was greenlit by the U.S., then guess who has to step in to defend Israel and to then go potentially get ourselves into another foreign war in the Middle East on behalf of Israel? It's the United States. So and not to mention the meddling in U.S. political affairs through organizations like AIPAC, et cetera. It is incredibly difficult at this point to make a case that there is any positive benefit to the U.S. in an allyship with Israel, not to even mention the immorality or the contradiction of values to back a country, to ally and to arm a country and to give them diplomatic cover as they are an apartheid state that's committing an ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and that's committing an active genocide in Gaza. So there really is no case at this point that Israel should be treated as a U.S. ally. If anything, we should be sanctioning them right now. So it's a great back-to-back sort of two questions there. And now Krystal's going to continue.
Human rights organization joined the global consensus, Amnesty International, some 800 scholars. There was a piece from an Israeli scholar in the New York Times in saying this is a genocide. Do you accept, even Marjorie Taylor Greene yesterday came out and said it's a genocide. Do you accept that? And if you do, I mean, what responsibility does a United States senator have for, this is a nation that, we send every year billions of dollars to aid that you have, voted for and supported. Like, what responsibility does a United States senator have to prevent genocide and to stop genocide that we see ongoing?
We have a responsibility up till today to ensure that food is getting in.
Is it
so
a
that
genocide?
People don't starve. I don't know that I'd use that term,
Why?
but it is violating the law of war.
Why don't you use the term though?
Because I think, it's, to me, do I think it's ethnic cleansing, which is what I think of in genocide? I don't know if it meets that definition.
They're announcing
Didn't you
it.
say it earlier that it was ethnic cleansing? You said that they wanted to force it. I mean, this is open from the Israeli government. Like, they're saying it. They're
And from
Minister
Trump,
of National
too.
Security. They come out and they're like, we don't need shells. We need shells, not food. And we need to encourage migration.
Look,
they're saying
you're not going to get me to
Yeah.
support what the Israeli government is saying right now.
Well, that's not what they were trying to do. They were trying to get you to acknowledge that if Israeli ministers are openly declaring that their plan for Gaza moving forward is to expel the entire population, that factually, by definition, that is ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing and genocide do have two different definitions. I mean, there's obviously overlap there, but genocide, the definition being the intentional, the willful destruction of a people, then obviously that applies to Gaza. Now, I think the difficult part here for Slotkin is that just a couple minutes ago, she was defending continuing to send weapons, both offensively and defensively, to Israel. By the way, it's completely illegal. You want to talk about international law, you want to talk about U.S. law, for the U.S. to be sending weapons, defensive, offensive, or otherwise, to a country that we know is committing war crimes with those weapons. It's illegal. So it's difficult for her to say simultaneously we should be sending them weapons and then also to admit it's an ethnic cleansing and it's a genocide, because then those two things are not compatible, right? But she continues.
I think the point I was trying to make is it's not just about, like, we have relationships with nations over time, regardless of who their leaders are. We have really tough moments. We have easier moments. But that doesn't, so I'm not willing to say.
And also on that note, it's not about the Israeli leader. It's not about Benjamin Netanyahu as an individual. That's not necessarily the problem. I mean, there's a whole host of problems with Benjamin Netanyahu specifically and his sort of genocidal psychopathy and everything. But this is broadly a structural problem with Israeli society. We are talking about an apartheid state. We are talking about an ethnic cleansing in the West Bank that's been going on well before October 7th. We're talking about an occupation of Gaza, a strangling of Gaza that, again, has been going on for well before October 7th. So this is a structural systemic problem that needs to be addressed. It's not about pushing Benjamin Netanyahu out of power and then suddenly our relationship is going to be great with Israel. No, you need to address the underlying issues here.
That, like, I hate everything ever.
Sure,
into
but so
the future.
even if you accept that they're committing a genocide, you still wouldn't cut off their aid?
I think that defensive aid and offensive aid are different things, and I think at this point,
So
what
if
they're
Nazi
doing
Germany,
every single day,
if Nazi Germany said we want defensive aid, I mean, it's just you have to see where they're all weapons that are being shipped. You know, in
they're
another
not using
context,
the weapons that they're using right now. I mean, to be honest, if you look at what's happening on the ground, the military part of this conflict is, for the most part, over. What they are doing, what they are doing
Senator,
every single day is around aid, and they are hurting
They
people
have
around the
slaughtered over
delivery of
1,000
aid.
people who were starving people just trying to get aid.
That is
I
not
know you
high,
know this.
That's not high intensity bombs. That's not the weapons that that we were talking about 2 years ago. It's just.
This is just a bizarre claim to me. I mean, I guess she's saying the intensity of the bombing from the skies has sort of slowed down to an extent, which I guess is somewhat true. But the main reason for that is that there's basically nothing left to bomb. I mean, for months at this point, Israel has just been bouncing the rubble in Gaza, which they do continue to do. It's not like they've completely ceased the bombing of Gaza. It's just that a disproportionate amount of the massacres that we're witnessing right now, as Krystal's pointing out there, are at and around these aid sites, these so-called aid sites that are really just killing fields inside of Gaza. But the notion that like the military front of this has ended is just kind of bizarre to me. I don't necessarily understand where she's coming at from that, I guess, in terms of the bombing. But I mean, again, just an absolutely bizarre thing to say when we have dozens and dozens of people that are being massacred on a daily basis. That's the military side of this, that the Israeli military is no longer operating. I'm not exactly sure what you meant by that.
It's not. I'm sorry. Every single day, the military reports that I read, they are traditional, like, this is a military that has a bad strategy. It is not the bombs that we were seeing 2 years ago.
It's not a military that has a bad strategy. The strategy is forced starvation and ethnic cleansing. That's their strategy, and they're accomplishing it very effectively with the full backing of the United States government, including, sadly, Democrats. Well, and so, a couple more questions that I know you have to run. You know, I'm curious why you condemned Rashida Tlaib for using the rally chant, you know, from the river to the sea, something she said for her evokes equal rights, and you have not condemned Randy Fine, who said that Gazans should, quote, starve away, who floated that the Gaza Strip should be nuked, who called Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Zoran as well, called them Muslim terrorists. Where is the concern over him?
I have no problem condemning Randy Fine, who I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know who that person is. I have no problem condemning someone who talks like that.
Senator, we have to ask your last question.
Okay, I mean, good, I guess, that you condemned a guy who's calling to nuke Gaza and, you know, celebrates when people send him pictures of dead children in Gaza on his Twitter timeline. I guess credit for that if you want it. But again, the broader thing there is that Rashida Tlaib was censured by Congress. She was censured by Congress for saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And we don't have a censorship of, you know, guys like Randy Fine or any number of the other Republicans who refer to people like Ilhan Omar as, you know, Muslim terrorists or who openly call for the destruction of Gaza, who give openly genocidal statements on the regular. There's no censorship for that, but there's censorship for a misinterpretation, a willful misinterpretation of a phrase calling for liberation and freedom from Rashida Tlaib. I mean, come on.
Because your staff is telling us, do you think AIPAC should register as a foreign lobby?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that I know plenty of people who think they should. You know, I don't.
It's kind of a cop-out answer, don't you think?
I mean, yeah. I literally, I just guess I'd have to look at the definition. I certainly have had my tough moments with that organization, and
so you stop accepting their funding.
You got to get your facts straight. I have not been endorsed by AIPAC. I have not. I'm sorry. I was the first Jew elected to the Senate that was not endorsed by any Jewish group. AIPAC, J Street.
You've been the recipient of their funds.
In 2018, when I first ran, people who were members, yes, but I've not been endorsed since then. And I just got to be honest. Like, I think that this is where facts really matter. I've had very, very difficult conversations with my colleagues in that organization, and made a choice back in 2021. So that was the first time I was up for re-election. So I understand that there's a sort of, like, again, cornered position, but.
Okay, so we can go ahead and wrap up on that. She says that Krystal doesn't have her facts straight. She has nothing to do with AIPAC. She doesn't know even the name of AIPAC or whatever. This is just not true, okay? It is true, I think, in this last round when she was running for the Senate position, I don't think that she got endorsed by AIPAC. But it's also true that she has gotten AIPAC money, tens of thousands, and from other Israeli lobbying organizations as well, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands throughout the years. So she certainly is backed by AIPAC. to a large extent. So let's not pretend as if we don't even know what AIPAC is and I've fully rejected them or whatever the case may be. That's just not factual. That is not true. And in regards to the question on should they register as a foreign lobbying organization, she kind of just throws her hands up in the air and says, well, I don't really know. I'd have to go look up the definition of it. I mean, it seems like it's a pretty simple definition, right? If you are a lobbying organization that is primarily lobbying on behalf of a foreign government, then you should have to register as a foreign lobbying organization. That seems pretty straightforward to me. And that is exactly precisely the mission of AIPAC. They exist to basically dump tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to unseat anybody in Congress or who's running for Congress who is critical of Israel, a foreign government. That's the entire purpose of AIPAC. So kind of impossible to make the argument that they're not lobbying on behalf of a foreign government. But anyways, we can wrap it up there. Again, fantastic job by both Krystal and Saagar throughout this interview. This is what real journalism should look like, right? This is not stuff that you're going to see on CNN or MSNBC or certainly not Fox News, right? Very rarely, if ever. So credit to, again, Krystal and Saagar. I think they did great in this interview. Hopefully, we can have more senators on Breaking Points, more politicians on Breaking Points. There's essentially an open invite at this point to anybody who is an elected official who wants to come on the show. We would love to have you. It's not going to be a softball interview. It's not going to be an easy interview necessarily, but we're going to ask real questions. And this is what people want to see, right? Go and look at the comment section underneath this kind of a video. This is what people want to see out of their elected officials. They want you to see you thrown into the fire. They want you to have to face difficult and uncomfortable situations and questions. And that's exactly what Krystal and Saagar did. So again, I'll leave you guys off with that. Incredible to see some of the major sort of liberal defenses and talking points and sort of standing on both sides of the equation, refusing to change your policy in regards to Israel while trying to, feign outrage at the human catastrophe that's happening at the U.S. government direction. But yeah, phenomenal job by them.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying